All right, Rochelle, thank you for joining me this morning. And we are very glad to launch our new feature, our CJJ Member Spotlight series. Thank you for all volunteering to be our first victim. So
So
let's
much for
introduce
having
you.
me, Mark. I'm excited
Yeah,
to do this.
excellent. Let's let folks know who you are. So, Rochelle is from Western Massachusetts, where she was an active member of her synagogue in USY. She received her undergraduate degree from Barnard College and Jewish Theological Seminary and spent her junior year abroad at Hebrew University. After 3 years in Washington, D.C., where Rochelle attended law school, she moved to Hawaii. And she practiced law at the Legal Aid of Society and taught the B'nai Mitzvah class at the Honolulu Synagogue. After moving to Durham in 2008, Rochelle had a 5 year stint practicing law at the North Carolina Justice Center and then served as the policy director for a sustainable agriculture nonprofit for several years. She then served as director of NC policy at the Center for Responsible Lending. And your current role is as Special Deputy Attorney General at the North Carolina Department of Justice.
All
Okay.
correct.
That is an impressive resume and bio, I'll just say. Thank you for being involved with CJJ and being on our board and using that excellent background for our community. So let's dig into more of that background and who you are. Will you tell us a little bit about your Jewish upbringing and your education?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. My family belonged to a conservative synagogue, and I went to Hebrew school extremely unwillingly as a child. Um, and, would like lock myself in the bathroom sometimes to avoid going. It was not my
I don't know anything about that.
and interestingly enough, after I had my bat mitzvah, I was like, I'm out, like mic drop, I'm out of here. But one of my very best friends as a child, her bat mitzvah was about 6 months after mine, and she asked if I would read Torah. And I
Hmm.
said, I don't actually know how. I memorized mine. And so she was like, well, my tutor's willing for you to come to my tutoring sessions, and she'll actually teach the both of us how to read Torah if you're willing to do this at my bat mitzvah. And I was like, oh, yeah, all right, cool. That sounds fun. Like it's just me and my friend and her tutor. And her tutor, a woman named Carolyn Lester, basically launched through the two of us a Hebrew high school program. Because
Hmm.
once we learned how to read Torah and we were showing up at synagogue more regularly and reading or leading services, she also helped us to learn how to lead services better. It was kind of clear that there was something there, right, that was more interesting to us than Hebrew school, regular Hebrew school pre B'nai Mitzvah had been. And so Alana and I were the like guinea pigs, I guess, of the Hebrew high school, which started when I was a teenager, and we both attended straight through until we graduated from high school, and it became, a multi-teacher program, and we both taught in the like we're teachers' aides in the Hebrew school and got involved in our youth group. We actually started the youth group chapter at our synagogue. And so that was sort of the beginning, I guess, the beginning of my Jewish leadership role.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I can relate to a lot of that too. I went to Hebrew high school, although I think through my sophomore year. And I don't remember being as willing a participant
Yeah,
as
great.
you are. My reticence remained from Hebrew, from Sunday school, I suppose. Um, but let me ask you this: what role does Judaism play in your life currently? Has that like continued since your high school leadership? And if so, what forms, other than participating in CJJ?
Yeah, so I think it's been actually a little bit of a struggle for me since I moved to North Carolina back in
Mm.
2008 to find Jewish community. Once I left my hometown and started going to college, in college, I was at JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, pursuing an undergraduate degree there as well as at Barnard. And so Jewish community was just sort of baked into my college experience. But once I
Yeah.
moved to DC, I was mostly finding Jewish community through involvement as a Hebrew school teacher.
Mm.
Um, and I taught in a in a Reform synagogue when I was in Washington, D.C., and another Reform synagogue when I was in Honolulu. And when I moved to Durham, I just couldn't figure out how to make the timing work. My commute to Raleigh was too long. I couldn't get back early enough to do, to be a Hebrew school teacher. And so I sort of floated around a little bit aimlessly and without much Jewish community for quite a while.
Mm.
And Debbie Goldstein, who was one of the folks that helped to found CJJ, approached me at some point in, the 2015, 16-ish time period about joining the board. I honestly don't even remember exactly when I joined the board anymore. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Um, but she said, would you be interested in this? And I was like, yes, I've been struggling to find Jewish community because I'm not, at that point in my life, wasn't interested in joining a synagogue and finding it through sort of Jewish institutions,
Yeah.
or like mainline Jewish institutions. And there just wasn't a lot else that I had found. And so that was an amazing opportunity for me to feel like I was getting to know Jews in my community and across the state. And so I've
Yeah.
been largely finding community there, but also have a decent bit of home ritual that I do as well, and have sort of incorporated a lot of my community here, both Jewish and not Jewish, into a lot of that ritual. And so, lighting Hanukkah candles includes my
Yeah.
next door neighbors and their son. They're not Jewish, and their son is excited to sing the dreidel song with me and see what it's like. He's 5. It's adorable. Um,
Yeah.
and I host a giant Passover Seder every year, and it's maybe half Jews, half non-Jews, but everybody knows the songs now because people have been
Yeah.
coming for a decade or longer, a lot of them. And so it's, that's sort of where I've been finding my Jewish ritual space, and then my Jewish communal spaces largely through CJJ.
Yeah. Awesome. Rochelle, what I'm hearing a lot in your story is stories like of so many other Jews of your and I'll say my generation. I think we're roughly the same age. But this trend of like engaging in Jewish education and in like finding a lot of yourself in that and early in our adolescence or childhood, and then kind of for one reason or another stepping away from that institutional role. I have certainly some of not the same pathway, but a lot of my path also mirrors that of gradually shifting away from institutional Judaism. And there's this need to create our own, spaces where we can feel and express our own Judaism. So I think it's amazing. You have a decade long running Seder. I'm still aspiring to do stuff like that more at home, but I think that story really captures a lot, or that track really captures a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Let's shift into the social justice mode. We talked about CJJ and you and expressing some of your Judaism that way. And again, I think that mirrors a lot of folks too. So you're a lawyer. You're on the board of a Jewish social justice organization. I'm guessing that justice is an important value to you in your life or professionally or all that.
All of that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's hard to track back when I was thinking, preparing to talk with you today. I was like, I'm not sure where to track that back to.
Yeah.
But I think some of the sort of melding of my interest in social justice work and my Judaism comes from the time that I spent living in Jerusalem.
Mm.
I studied my junior year abroad at Hebrew University, and it was an eye-opening experience, to be sure, to live in Israel. And this was a long time ago, and the politics of the country were somewhat different back then.
Sure.
Um, but that was actually the place. I'm politically very active now, as well as being involved in, sort of social justice work from an issue
Hmm.
standpoint. But that was the first place and the first time where I got really politically involved,
Yeah.
and volunteered for a political campaign for Knesset, for the Meretz Party.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know, I actually haven't kept up terribly well with sort of the party politics of Israel, but at least back then when I was living there, I think it was 1998 and 1999, they were one of the only political parties that was thinking about like how to bring Palestinians into politics, and formed
Hmm.
a a party that was sort of based around some justice issues, particularly around the Israeli-Palestinian divide. And that
Yeah.
very quickly, like very quickly after I moved there, I was like, something is wrong here to me, like something that violates my values and my sense of like people having equal access to power and the levers of government and just access to a meaningful life. And so that was, the first, my first political
Yeah.
experience. And it was an intense one in a lot of ways, but I carried some of what was easier for me to see, I think, as an outsider, as something that violated my values, and carry that back home and realize that things at home were not as wonderful and glossy and glorious as, sort of my civics and history education had led me to believe in Western Massachusetts, that racism
Yeah.
has ended and women have access to power as well and everything's fine. And I came back and I was
Yeah.
like, everything was not fine in Israel. And oh, now that I kind of recognize what not fine looks like, I see that at home too. So I
That's
think that was
really,
sort of a good origin story when I was thinking back about like how did
yeah.
I get involved?
That's really interesting that it was your experience abroad in Israel in another society, even if we identify closely with it or somewhat with it. But it's seeing it there that made you kind of mirror it back to what you grew up with. I don't have anything in that, but I just find that interesting and noteworthy. I think it does take sometimes stepping outside of what is known to like really be able to come back and look at yourself or what you've come to know as your own with a more objective or eye. I think that and that's a helpful thing to do, right? Because we're a lot better informed that way and can make better decisions about things. Anyways,
Definitely changed my life. I,
yeah, no doubt. Um, so my other question was, and I think we kind of started on this road, but how do your Jewish values influence your current professional pursuits?
So I think, sort of in the day in and day out of doing litigation work, not very much other than that I think that the sort of values that are often expressed in the court system are also expressed in Jewish tradition.
Hmm.
That our religion is a rule-based one. And that, adherence to those rules is, nobody's forcing you to do it, but it's provides sort of this pattern for what is a observant Jewish life. Um, and that's something I've studied and occasionally lived by. And now, I am largely secular Jew, but not entirely.
Yeah.
But I see some of that in the court system, right? It's sort of there's this very rule-based, very like careful reading, argumentative, very Talmudic feeling back
Hmm.
and forth with the court system, and that there's not often not clearly a right answer until the court tells you what the right answer is. Um, and so to that extent, I see some relationship between sort of the study of Talmud that I did and Midrash that I did when I was an undergraduate and the work that I do now. But I think sort of the choice of substantive work that I do is driven to some extent by the values that I have through my Jewish faith or my Jewish traditions.
Yeah.
Doing work on economic justice has been a thing that I have been working on since I graduated, or even before I graduated from law school. And it's taken different forms. I've done a lot of work around access to healthcare and public benefits work, but consumer protection work has been a large part of my professional life. And I think that that is in large part because it seems really valuable to me that we, again, sort of place people on a footing where they have a life that is, easy enough financially and that people aren't taking advantage of folks. Um, all of that just seems really important to me and I think can be traced back to Jewish values around, we do have a fair amount of information in our tradition about economic justice
Oh, yeah.
and building a good life and making sure that society is structured in a way to offer that that I see reflected in the work that I do on consumer justice
Yeah.
issues.
A couple of things struck me as you were describing the legal system and the argumenting about the laws and all that stuff, and how you don't really know what it is until somebody rules on it. And to me, that all comes back to like, well, what values is your system based on? Because that's what's really going to guide you making the decision, right? When it's like that, when you have to dive in that deeply and that granularly. And that certainly mirrors the Jewish experience, right? Because we argue about everything, and there's 18 different ways to do anything, right? And it all comes back to just this basic set of values that we do all agree on, and we can say, yeah, this is about that, and this is about this. Um, so you mentioned consumer protection. And I know you were at the Center for Responsible Lending for a good long while. Is consumer protection part of your charge at the NC Department of Justice in your current
Yeah,
role?
so I do work in the consumer protection division there, and am largely working on cases that relate to robocalls and robotexting and scams.
Mm.
So a little bit different than what I was working on in terms of substance in my prior consumer protection work, but also pretty related
Yeah.
in some ways. Learning a new technology and understanding how that system works, and how scammers are using it to exploit people, and figuring out how to use the law to try and stop them from doing that is kind of thematically similar to work that I've done in consumer protection elsewhere. And I still do a little bit of like pinch hitting on some of the issues that I worked on at the Center for Responsible Lending. Those issues are in other folks' portfolio in the DOJ, but because I've got some background in it, sometimes they tap me to sit in on meetings or help out with stuff, and I'm always glad to be included.
Nice. Give me one or two things that you are like the most proud of in your consumer protection work or in your, yeah.
Ooh, I think some of the stuff I'm most proud of dates back to my time at the Justice Center, actually, when I was
Okay.
doing almost exclusively foreclosure prevention work.
Mm. Yeah.
And I was working there. I started in the fall of 2008. So right before the mortgage meltdown started,
All right.
with real earnest, like with something that I guess it was affecting the entire economy.
Yeah.
In 2008, there was sort of this moment where it was still like the crisis was still incipient for a lot of people, for sort of mainstream folks. But a lot of the mortgage products that led to the mortgage meltdown that brought the whole economy kind of crashing down with it were products that were sold to not particularly savvy folks, oftentimes people of color, like a lot of Black families, at least in North Carolina in particular, lost a lot of what could have been generational wealth because they lost their homes because people
Mm.
really exploited, um, just sort of a general, and I don't think this is at all exclusive to the Black community. I think they were just more susceptible and targeted by these products for whatever reason. But there were folks out there, mortgage brokers and others, who were looking to capitalize on the fact that home prices were rising, 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 um, to sell people products that they genuinely could not afford in the
Mm.
long term, but they could afford in the short term, very short term, for a couple of years. And the sort of sales pitch was like, well, your home value is going to keep going up, so you'll be able to refinance at any time into a
Mhm.
better, loan product, to the
Yeah.
extent I think that people even knew to ask. And they were really saying, like, I know this market, I understand how mortgages work, you can totally afford this, really leading people astray.
Mm.
Um, and then after the crash happened, there were so many people who lost their jobs, so many people who lost value in their houses because people near them were getting foreclosed on, which drags down the value of properties
Yeah.
nearby, that people couldn't refinance out of expensive loans, even as interest rates were dropping, or they couldn't pay their mortgages because they'd lost their job or lost a substantial portion of their income. And then there was this whole new sort of scam that was out there about mortgage modifications, where loan servicers were ostensibly modifying people's loans, but they were doing such a bad job of it, and there was so little oversight of that. They're sort of dragging out the process. And in the meanwhile, people were losing value in their homes because the fees that they owed the servicer were racking up. And so by the time they even got foreclosed on, there was less equity in the property for them to even walk away with to be able to afford to, say, rent a place or buy somewhere smaller. Um, it was a hot mess. And
Mm.
so just being involved in that work and trying to preserve people's home ownership, or at the very least, the most equity that they could possibly get out of their property if they weren't going to be able to hold on to it, was a thing that I was really, I found it really emotionally taxing to do that work. But it also felt really, really valuable. And we just saw so many different ways that people were taking advantage of folks who were in foreclosure, and being able to sort of step into that breach and help people try to preserve some wealth or home ownership was really, really the most valuable work I think I've done.
Yeah. I think I could talk to you about this for a whole other half hour. Maybe we'll do that at some point. And I know in the Greensboro area where I grew up, and I'm in High Point now, but still around Greensboro, I know how homelessness and the house situation is a lot worse than we could expect it to be, and getting worse. And I think um, some of the result of the '08 market crash is that corporate home ownership has skyrocketed, and some of the availability of homes is now controlled by corporate entities, which is squeezing more and more people. I won't go into that, but I'm going to set that aside
Let's
as a
talk about
possible.
that sometime.
Yeah, let's talk for sure. I'm going to jot that down on my notebook for a possible next conversation. Um, but getting us back to CJJ, I'll just ask a couple of questions to close with. I know you said you got involved back because back in 15 or 16 or somewhere around then because Debbie Goldstein asked you to. But what resonated with you about CJJ then, and what has made you kind of stay with it up till now? It's like 10 years.
I know it's been so long. Maybe not,
Hmm.
maybe. Um, so I think that what resonated for me about it a lot was, when I was meeting with Debbie, we talked some about the history of the organization and how initially it grew out of a need for there to be some sort of umbrella Jewish organization participating in the Moral Monday movement. And I
Hmm.
think that spoke to me a lot. I will say that as a person who had moved to North Carolina and to the South fairly recently, before the Moral Monday movement got started, because I moved here in 2008, um, that one of the things that was sort of complicated for me about the Moral Monday movement was how sort of church oriented and Christian it was, with the songs and the way that people talked about moral values. And I recognized and understood why that was, or took some time to figure out why that was, but also really wanted a place where a way in that felt familiar to me. And so hearing Debbie talk about CJJ as being this sort of like moral space, progressive space for Jews to gather and participate in what are oftentimes sort of more overtly Christian, but like progressive Christian organizing efforts, felt really meaningful to me when she talked about it. And also, as I've said, I was sort of floating around looking for, I wasn't looking hard, but, sort of open to finding a Jewish progressive space that I could participate in and feel like honored both my Judaism and my progressive values really explicitly. That felt really important to me. And so I think for both of those reasons, I got involved and stuck around for as long as I have, mostly because no one's kicked me out yet. But also because I
And
feel
nobody
like
will.
as we've sort of moved through these times, there have been sort of people who helped found the organization or predecessor organizations who were involved in leadership roles on the board. And I was just sort of on the board. And sometimes there wasn't a lot for board members to be doing. I think the executive committee was holding a lot of what needed to be held, and the executive directors, and before we had executive directors, the staff were sort of holding a lot of the work. And I think over time, we've sort of started to transition into having actual asks of board members, like work that we could do.
Mhm.
And in that time, I've been asked to take on specific roles. And I think one of the things that feels very true to me is that people want to do this work.
Mhm.
We want to help ensure that the organization is financially stable, that the organization has good oversight of its finances, that there's oversight of the sort of strategic plan of the organization, and that people want to be asked to do things, and that they are unlikely to invent out of, at least for me, I am unlikely to invent sort of out of whole cloth a role for me to take on and sort of step in and elbow my way into doing that work. But when people on the board said, "Hey, Rochelle, would you be willing to serve as secretary?" I was like, okay. And when people were like, "Hey, Rochelle, like, we need a board chair," I was like, oh gosh, okay. I don't, I work a lot. And so, it's been really nice to have Cheryl Lesser also step into a
Hmm.
co-chair role with me. Um, as a person who is also very busy but retired, we're able to sort of coordinate our schedules to make sure that there's one of us at least available when there's need, whether that's
Yeah,
during work hours, like 9 to 5 office hours, or outside of that. But being asked to step in to do something, I think, is meaningful, and I've learned a lot from that about asking other board members to step in and
yeah,
do something, and find that generally they will if you ask them for something explicit and concrete.
yeah. Well, as a staff person, I absolutely appreciate and value our working CJJ board and very much appreciate all you guys do, and including participating on this call today. Thank you again for being the guinea pig. Um, so I think you delved into this a little bit already, but what do you see the role for CJJ in the statewide Jewish community?
I mean, I think we're filling our role. What I think is we need to expand our voice so that people know to find us.
Mm,
And that makes me really excited, right? Like I feel like we know what we're doing, we know what we're working on, and we are, I think, still that sort of progressive, values-based or Jewish organization that can bring together people regardless of their synagogue affiliation or lack thereof, to come together and do Jewish progressive work.
mm,
And I think now I'm feeling like we just need to make sure people know we're here. And so I kind of think staying true to those values and staying true to the work that the organization has outlined for itself in the issue areas that it's prioritizing. Right now, obviously, somewhat obviously, if people know when this is recorded, it's December of 2025. The thing that rises to the top very quickly when thinking about what are the progressive Jewish values that we are holding space for right now, immigration related issues are top of mind. I think, as we're seeing Border Patrol and ICE be more expansively present in the state, and seeing a lot of people step up and looking for that like explicit ask of what can I do? I don't want to just care. I want to care with my hands, right? I want to do
yeah,
something. And so being able to recognize that among our membership, being able to help people find the work that needs to be done is huge. And I think we're prepared to be doing that in a number of issue areas, and that more things are going to be coming at us, and it'll be different things that we prioritize as the ebbs and flows of this administration's work and our legislature's work, um, happen.
yeah,
And so that makes me glad, really glad to be part of CJJ, and also feel like we need to make sure that people where we don't have organizers know that we're there and that we can help them to find
yeah,
those connections, even if they're not, in Durham where Rabbi Sandra lives, if they're not in the Triad where you are, Mark, if they're not out west where Lisa is, that
yeah,
we can support people in Charlotte who are looking for that type of Jewish community, that we can support people in Raleigh, that we can support people in Greensboro, that we can support, or in Greenville, sorry, that we can support people in rural parts of the state as well.
yeah.
Like wherever there are Jews, there is CJJ, and access to our staff. And so making sure that we get the word out to me feels like the place that we need to go in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I was going to ask you about your 5-year vision. You just described it for me. So
That's it.
awesome.
Make sure
Yeah.
people know, and expand our
Well, as a
membership.
comms person, I take that to heart, and we'll get on it. Um, awesome, Rochelle. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this discussion and letting the CGJ community or sharing your thoughts with them. I think people really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really glad that you asked me.